All right. So thanks, Megan, for that. Like she said, my name is Sean Darrington, Senior Director of Product Management here at StorageCraft. I hope everybody on the call is safe and healthy, and their families are healthy as well during this time. And so what I wanted to do today is I want to do a couple things. Number one, really want to talk about and share some of the solutions about how we can help customers recover from either a failure, ransomware attack, and so forth. So during the presentation, we're going to do a couple things. Number one, Megan mentioned that we are going to give away a $100 Grubhub card to one of the attendees on the call today. But we're also going to have gift cards for 2 additional attendees. In the right-hand side, you should be able to see a questions tab in your, you can chat the questions. We'll be monitoring that, and I'll be answering those as we go through the presentation today. And for the 2 best questions, you're going to be able to select from one of those 3 gift cards, either Netflix, Amazon Prime, or Grubhub as well, and we'll just choose those at the end. So 3 of you will win gift cards today. So let me jump right in just in terms of setting the stage a little bit. Wanted to set the stage with a little bit about what we're seeing with ransomware, particularly around how it's changing how IT organizations need to protect themselves. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time going into the background about ransomware. I think most people understand that it is something that has changed, and it's now thinking much more along the lines of what will I do when I'm hit or infected, as opposed to trying to just kind of put your head in the sand and ignore it. Consequently, we've seen, particularly with the COVID pandemic, a rise in focused attacks, but we're also just seeing overall from 2018 and 2019, there was a significant increase in the number of specific phishing and URL attacks. So what I wanted to do is just kind of, before I get into the presentation, which is going to be fairly technical, I did want to just quickly take a poll just to kind of see what everybody's feeling is about how prepared they are for a ransomware attack. So you have just a moment or so. We'll leave this poll open, but basically I just want to kind of get a sense of how prepared you feel that you are for a ransomware attack. Bring it on. I'm really, really confident, all the way to I'm a little nervous about it, to I've already been hit and had challenges, or if you'd rather not say where you are and kind of your thought process and so forth, just select the ask me another time. So we'll give everybody a little bit of time here to vote. We've got good, well over half of you have already voted here, and it's looking like a pretty middle split here. We've got, I'll show the results here in just a second. So just a little bit more about the format today. While the rest of you are voting here, I did want to go through a few slides, just kind of setting the stage, going into some technical details about the architecture that we have in the solution, but then also flip over and do a couple demos and show you how to recover in 2 different types of scenarios. All right, so with that, I'm going to close the poll, and it looks like most people, I'll go ahead and share these results. Most people are nervous about it, which is very common. That is a lot of the conversations we're having. And the rest of you, 37%, are feeling pretty good about it. So we've got a good middle ground here about people that are looking at how to improve the scenario, and as well as people that are confident, have already done a good job with that. So that's great. So let me flip back here now to the presentation. And just by way of a quick overview, so StorageCraft, we've been in a data protection business for almost 17 years, and part of that, we began to launch, and we actually acquired a company, Exablocks, which has a scale-out storage solution. And what this is the ability to really think about data protection and storage management in a different way, because OneSafe can be used in a variety of ways to provide storage services, but also data protection services. We also have ShadowSafe, which is a standalone data protection solution for physical and virtual environments. And I'll be showing you a little about little bit of the demo later. But then lastly, in both of these areas, depending upon if you're looking at protecting information on premises or in the cloud, StorageCraft has the opportunity to offer full DR as a service options for recovering VMs in our cloud and running those in our cloud, as well as other things like Office 365 backup and so forth. But for today, I really wanted to focus on OneSafe and the storage landscape and how that can actually provide you a solution to not only manage your data better, but get the data back really quickly in the event of an infection. So just a quick architecture discussion here in terms of the typical legacy storage. This has been around for decades, obviously, where you have a block store and you have RAID, LUNs, and volumes, and they're serving up file system or block protocols. The difference is that OneSafe is actually not built on a legacy block store. It's actually built on a content addressable object store. That affords us a number of opportunities that we can still look like network attached storage. So we still present NFS and SMB microservices for your applications. So we look like scale out NAS, but underneath the covers we're an object store, and that gives you a lot of benefits to be able to do things like inline deduplication and compression, take continuous and infinite snapshots. But whether you're looking at file system protocols or data protection services, these are all microservices. These are running in a container on the cluster, and you can now have just a seamless access to a pool of storage. And that's what the large blue disk in the bottom is. Regardless if you're starting from 10 terabytes or a couple hundred terabytes to a petabyte, it all looks like a pool of storage. And that affords you a few things, a few opportunities, because when you look at how you can manage storage more easily, you don't have to worry about LUNs or volumes anymore. It's just a pool of storage that can increase dynamically over time, but you also have some opportunities to really maximize that storage in the ways of inline deduplication and compression for both primary storage as well as a backup recovery target. It really doesn't matter. There are multiple uses there, but you also have the opportunity for fault domain protection either locally or with remote replication. But what we've done with OneSafe is actually not only provide that storage and scale out capabilities, but also the opportunities to incorporate data protection services. And so whether you're looking at an agent or an agentless based approach for physical or virtual servers, we provide the opportunities to protect those, not only the primary storage, but also the backups in an immutable fashion. And I'll get into a little bit about the difference between what we actually mean by immutable snapshots here in a second. The other opportunity from a data protection standpoint is to be able to recover really quickly. Literally in less than a second, you can begin to recover those VMs. When you're looking at this and thinking about different architectures, really taking the approach of looking at the storage infrastructure and the server infrastructure and thinking about recovery, right? Because as far as some of the questions coming in here, as far as the best way to protect yourself, you obviously have to have the perimeter defenses, right? The firewall, the AV, the employee education about phishing attacks, etc. But from a standpoint of being prepared for the event of recovery, you need to think about how potentially taking a different approach to this, right? So typical deployment for physical and virtual servers is that a lot of the unstructured data is actually running as VMs, VMware, Hyper-V, it doesn't matter, but they're running in the virtual environment. And so you wind up, if you think of this, like typically the unstructured data is about 75% of the storage, database apps and so forth are the kind of the other 25%. And for your organization, if it's 50-50 or 75-25, whatever the split is, oftentimes customers tell me that the unstructured data is the part that's more difficult to manage as well as more difficult to predict the growth. So in this sense of where you have 100% of your storage in a virtual environment, you're spending a lot on primary storage, whether you're using OneSafe as a primary storage for VMware or if you're using another tier 1, tier 2 storage vendor of your choice. You have all that storage, and typically it's more expensive running there, but now you're backing that up to OneSafe as a backup target, right? So you're protecting all of your data, doing your typical backups. What this leads to is that most organizations have, at best, a 15-minute recovery point for their VMs, right? These are the APIs that VMware exposes that many of the vendors, including us, take advantage of. So you can actually have a short RPO for a smaller percentage of your VMs, right? Because you can't be running backups on all of your VMs all the time. But you're also consuming a lot of that expensive tier 1 storage, right? The dollar per terabyte for what you would actually need from a performance and availability perspective for VMware tends to be much more expensive than what you would spend on, say, a tier 2 or even a backup target, right? So the other aspect is, what's that recovery time? If you're going to recover 100 terabyte share for your engineers, how quickly is that going to be able to recover it in that typical data protection architecture, right? So what if you think about doing things a little bit differently? And that's where we recommend actually reimagining that storage and the data protection and getting all that unstructured data, getting 75% of your storage out of VMs, right? Eliminate the Windows VMs and actually run that on a OneSafe, right? So in a OneSafe cluster, it's looking like scale-out NAS. Your apps and your databases are still residing and running as VMs. You're still providing data protection services for that, for those VMs. But now you actually have the opportunity to have different recovery points. So for all of your VMs, you're gonna have the same 15-minute RPO for the primary, the most important VMs. But now for all the unstructured data, you actually have a very granular 90-second RPO. So every 90 seconds, we're taking snapshots, right? And from a data protection standpoint, you can actually recover any VMware share or any Hyper-V, I shouldn't say share, it's just a VM, in a few seconds, right, with our technology. But also that 100 terabyte engineering share, I'll show you in a minute about how you can actually promote a snapshot and recover that 100 terabyte share in about 15 seconds, right? And that actually also allows you to eliminate the Windows VM license, give you some additional host resources because you have fewer VMs running on your hosts, as well as it frees up that tier 1, tier 2 primary storage, and that typically all flash storage that's needed for your virtual environment. So you can reallocate those dollars and potentially postpone purchasing more expensive storage with a different approach about actually offloading the data to OneSafe for the unstructured data. That actually allows you to use a cluster, use a OneSafe cluster in a variety of fashion, right? You can use it for different shares for different purposes, and you can define policies on a per share basis, right? This allows you to have the ability to eliminate capacity growth on a per application basis, and you can actually have, in this case, you can see the VM backups, you're doing your file serving, you've got your body cams, dash cams, evidentiary information, things like that that are unstructured. They're going to grow. They're going to be able to be less predictable. And that's one of the things where you can grow from 70 terabytes to 200 terabytes. And you can actually replicate that off-site if you need to for DR purposes, right? So there's a lot of opportunities, a lot of flexibility about how OneSafe can be used. Now, one of the things we talk about when you're going to offload the unstructured data, it's all about the recovery of that, right? And the first part of this that I want to talk about was that 75% of the data, right? So how are you going to get that back quickly, and how is that going to be protected with this type of architecture? So one of the things to understand is the difference between snapshots and protections that are immutable with our architecture versus others. So this is a typical block store, right? And this is, everybody's familiar with RAID and how parity is distributed across multiple disks, LUNs, and volumes in a typical sense, right? Now, the trick is actually for the updates. So if you modify files, that file is going to go through and the parity is going to be read, modify, write, right? So the new parity calculations based upon the new data is going to generate what you see in the second thing, the parity highlighted in red, which doesn't match the original data volume. And that's fine, that's files are being updated. And some storage vendors can take snapshots of that. I mean, a lot of people can take snapshots, but you'll notice that the snapshots may not be the same. They actually point back to the volume. They're dependent upon that primary volume. There's no way to revert back to the original parity calculations, right? And not everybody does this, but most storage vendors do that. With OneSafe, you actually have the opportunity for immutable objects and immutable storage of not only the unstructured data, but also of your backups, right? So this is going back to the previous slide at the beginning. This is our object store, right? So the file system writes out files and we break those up and we do deduplication, compression, as well as the opportunity for encryption at rest and other things. So what this means is the file system is actually writing to a certain number of objects, right? Now, when a file is updated, the B tree that keeps track of what all these objects are, those are updated as well, and any new objects are written out. However, you'll notice that it's just basically referencing the previous B tree structure, different inodes up and down the tree. Those original objects were not overwritten during this process, right? They're kept around and they're still used by the files as needed. Now, if the file system is updated again, they take a snapshot of this as an example, those new objects are still written out to the cluster, right? You have a file system that still sees the PowerPoint, it still sees all those engineering files, and it's just referencing exactly the objects that are needed to satisfy that request, right? But all of the original objects are there. Now, as part of the background and the garbage collection over time, those objects, if they're not being used anymore, if your snapshots have expired, they're going to be marked and they're going to be set to be cleaned up, if you will, and they'll be put back into the pool of storage and made available over time. And so this cluster-wide, or I should say a global deduplication, this is one of the questions that came in. Within a OneSafe cluster, everything is globally deduplicated, right? So across multiple file systems, if you create multiple shares, everything is going to be deduplicated. Now, when you encrypt this data, all that encryption at rest actually happens below below the layer. So you still do the deduplication, compression. We then calculate a SHA-1 hash of that segment, which is now a hash value, and then that's actually encrypted. So you have the opportunity to deduplicate really across the entire cluster, and this is particularly applicable for multiple workflows. If you have multiple backups, multiple VMs across multiple hosts, those are all going to be deduplicated. So this is really where, from a file system and its architecture standpoint, this is one of the things that makes it so important about how you can actually protect the information through immutable snapshots, which is actually an infinite number of snapshots. But ransomware, your users, they can't delete or modify the snapshots, right? Those snapshots can never be tainted with. They're always going to be the original content. And that's one of the things that when you take a look at how you're going to recover that information on a per share basis, you can decide how you want to protect that information. So if you have engineering shares, if you have dash cam body worn cameras that you need to keep for 3 months or a year, you can set that retention policy on a per share basis, right? And then we're going to take snapshots every 90 seconds. And every 90 seconds, you're going to have a recovery point, assuming it's an active file system. Otherwise, it'll look like it's not there. But the other thing is all the snapshots are deduplicated against the primary storage. So when you have snapshots every 90 seconds the first hour, you then have less snapshots. We start to thin those out. So you have hourly snapshots for the first day, daily snapshots for the first week, and you can see they're basically monthly after the first year, but weekly snapshots for the first year. So at any point in time, you can go back to a prior state of that file system, whether that be for individual file recovery or whether that be for an entire share. So depending upon the type of recovery you want to do, your users have the same rights to the snapshot folder just through Windows Explorer as they do to the primary share. So we integrate with Active Directory, and if your users are working on and they need to recover the PowerPoint file, they can just simply right mouse Windows previous version, and they'll actually see the 5 different versions of that PowerPoint file in the last hour that they were working on, right? And they can recover that. If you want to recover an entire share, and we've had this unfortunately, where customers have been infected with ransomware, and it's gone out and infected the entire mapped network drive, that means that you've got to recover 100 terabytes. And so I'll show you how to do that in just a moment, where you can do that in literally less than 15 seconds. So I'm just going to read through. We've got a couple questions coming in. One. All right, so separate DR locations, how does the solution work? So yeah, so as far as kind of summarizing the question, you've got to consider different parts of this, right? You've got to, there's a natural vulnerability, then there are obviously the physical sides of this, where regardless of where you're located, our solutions, you can actually manage OneSafe with one system, and through one system that gives you the ability. It's a cloud-based management service where you can manage multiple clusters across multiple locations, and that includes both the storage as well as the data protection. So our solutions are really afforded and can be remotely managed. We have, I know, looking at the attendee list here on the call, there are lots of existing customers that are actually using OneSafe and replicating that to another data center in a different state, right? And everything is remotely managed. So that is one of the things you can do as far as having OneSafe remotely replicate to either cluster, and you can do promotion of a share in literally 3 mouse clicks from your failover site if needed. Okay. Let's see. So here's a question. A customer They have multiple international locations, and they're looking at cloud-based protection. So for the, does that require an on-premises OneSafe for a branch office, or can you use something else? So the part of it's going to be the ability to, for data, if you're thinking about data protection, you can deploy ShadowSafe in a remote office, a different location. You don't need to have a OneSafe appliance. You certainly can based on the scale. But if it's a smaller branch office, you can do the data protection and manage that through one system locally. That'll back up to the local storage destination, and then you can replicate that over to OneSafe, or you can replicate that into our cloud or S3. For the other locations for storage, if we're talking about offloading the unstructured data, that would be for OneSafe, and that would be an on-premises storage deployment that would be used there. Depending upon your capacity, you can start with 10 terabytes or a little bit less even if you needed to, and then you can grow to more than a petabyte. And that's what I'll go through a couple examples and deployment scenarios there, but that's what a lot of people can do there. Okay, excuse me. Okay, so what does this really look like? So let me flip over here to my demo here. Okay, so I have MIT here, and I'm just going to make sure that okay, everybody's able to see that still. So this is one of the things, and who doesn't like puppies, right? So this is a little slow because I'm working from home, going back to our offices in Draper. But this is actually my chocolate lab puppy before I got him, obviously still with the breeder there. But that's on the MIT folder, okay? And here you have different snapshots that are taking place, and you can you'll be able to navigate into this and see the different recovery points. I'm going to actually show you the way you can actually recover and promote a snapshot for a full system recovery. Now, as I mentioned, there are a number of existing customers that are using OneSafe that I see on the attendee list. This is on the 3.2.1 software version. So this is something that's relatively new, but it is one of the things that that's very useful. So a couple things. Number one, I just logged into the X console. You can get access to this through iDRAC for those remote locations, and so that's not an issue. And now you can do a number of things, and most of the things we do is through one system, or the web console for configuring networks, etc. The X console is kind of a fallback. You can do some things here, and if at any point you can just type help, and you can see different things that you want to be able to do. There's the network settings, look at SNMP traps and so forth. We're actually going to go into the share. This is where I can begin to see the shares, and here again, this is that same MIT folder that I was accessing before. I can see the different shares that I have on my cluster. I can see if it's writable, my snapshot retention, if I have compression on or off, and if I have deduplication, what type of deduplication we do. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to enable local share management. This is going to enable me to clone a given share. So if I want to clone MIT to MIT2, I've now just created a clone of that entire share, and there's not much data there, but this entire share was just cloned in a matter of seconds. So if you want to use this for test dev, you can do that, and then you can go in and delete MIT2 when you're done, and MIT1 is the primary share where your users are accessing. That continues to go forward as it is, but MIT2 is completely read-writable. I mean, here I haven't made it writable yet, but you can, and then you can do whatever you need to do. Now, when you clone a share, because of our architecture, everything is actually deduplicated, right? So coming back to the unstructured data, largest volume, if you're creating multiple clones of your dash cam video for different officers or different departments, all that's going to deduplicate against one another. So now, the other thing you can do is you can list the snapshots, right? So these are all the different recovery points that I have for my MIT share, right? And you can see, go back to February 13th. This is my test system, so the file system obviously is not very active. Otherwise, you would see more recovery points here. But you can see basically, the 13th here, 1427, etc. So now if I want to actually promote this snapshot, and if you want to go back, I'll show you, we'll go back to like this one here. So we're going to promote the snapshot, and we're just going to do, anytime again, you can just do the help for the syntax. So we're going to do, scroll up here, I'm going to get 2098 is a snap ID. So snapshot, promote, MIT is a share, and then this the snap ID is that recovery point that I mentioned. So 2098, and we'll call this MIT3. Okay, so now what this is going to do in less than 15 seconds or so, this is going to actually promote that snapshot as of this point in time to be a new MIT3 share. Everything older, all the snapshots older than that are going to be kept, but all the snapshots newer than that snap ID 2098 are going to be thrown away, right? So if you have a map network drive, a map share, you have 100 terabyte of your user data that's encrypted from ransomware, you can actually promote this snapshot, and then just prior to the infection point, that way everything that was encrypted is now kept still as MIT, but this new MIT3 share now shows just these recovery points, right? So everything newer is thrown away, but if my infection was back on May 14th, or I should say March 26th, this is still all good data. I still want to have those recovery points. But now I'm going to start taking new snapshots of this cloned share. So if this is a recovery scenario, you would just change MIT name to something else, and you'd have MIT3, rename that to MIT, and now your users are going to see and mount a volume in a file system as of that point in time. So that's one of the things that's very easy to do. So I'm going to just quickly see if I can refresh this. Connect to MIT3. Okay, now you'll notice that there's no data in here, because as of this point in time, there wasn't files written there. So if I had files written there outside of my test environment, you would have seen that. So the last thing to do is you just want to disable the share management, and then you can log out and you're done. So this is one of the things that from a recovery standpoint, you have a lot of flexibility to recover what you want to do for the unstructured data. So now let me check. There's a number of questions coming in here. 1 second. All right, so here's a question about how do you protect the snapshots from bad actors, either deleting backups or changing retention policies. So a couple things. Number one, admins or users cannot delete a snapshot from like Windows Explorer or Mac Finder, as you were looking at before. In Windows Explorer, you'll see it disappear for a moment, but it's a Windows refresh. So if you refresh it, those snapshots will be there. And that's actually true for protecting the unstructured data or protecting backups. So if somebody goes in and deletes a backup, yeah, that file is going to be deleted from a OneSafe cluster. Now, oftentimes we recommend that you have the snapshot retention of a week or a month maybe of your backup files. So if those backup files are deleted through the application itself, so if you have somebody that goes through and they're using Veeam and us as a backup target, if they delete the backup jobs through Veeam, Veeam may look like it's deleting everything, but underneath the covers, those snapshots, you'll still have those VBK files that you can go back to and import. As far as bad actors within one system, if you're going to change, if you're going to delete a share, if you're going to shorten a snapshot retention policy, we do have a strong password protection as well as two-factor authentication to make sure that that is actually an admin that is intending to do what they're doing. Now, there's nothing to stop somebody that has legitimate admin rights from going in and doing this. So you still have to manage the people that way. But that's one of the ways that we protect the deleting backups as well as changing retention policies. So here's a question on a little bit more about how deduplication works. So OneSafe, as files are being written into the cluster, we actually look at those files and we segment those files into smaller chunks, if you will, and different sized bytes of a file. And depending on the type of deduplication that you set within on a per share basis, variable length deduplication is going to give you high deduplication ratios for backups, as an example, where if you have just 1 bit change in a file, you have to be able to be flexible in understanding where those segment lines are for the best deduplication. Right. After that, we then compress those segments, then we calculate that SHA-1 hash. And so those objects are now all kept track of in that B tree that I was showing you earlier about why our file system and why OneSafe has immutable snapshots. But all of those objects are kept track of in an index. So in each OneSafe, you have an object index and you have all the data written to the drives. And so it's that ratio and that mapping that keeps track of what objects reside on the drives, which can be deduplicated against multiple files and even across multiple shares. So let's see. Do you feel there's any scenario would infect the security of the snapshot backups? No, there's not. Well, actually, there's one scenario. So if you have your snapshot retention policy set to a week, let's say, and ransomware infects your files, but it lays dormant for more than a week, and those snapshots of the clean files are actually just retired based on your snapshot retention policy, then you're going to be exposed to that, right? But as far as ransomware compromising the integrity of the snapshots themselves, there's not a way for them to do that. They can't change or delete that. They can't disable snapshots. Some of the ransomware can actually disable VSS snapshots where it looks like it's still taking place, but it's not. So they can't modify the snapshot policy. They can't modify the data itself. It's just a question about the retention period that you want to have in place for that. A couple other questions here for how does the system handle power loss and if you have a database windows. So yeah, so if OneSafe, if you have number one, all the writes to OneSafe are durable. So we actually have an MVDM in each OneSafe, and so as the writes are coming in, they're landing in a non-volatile memory that even if the dual power supply that OneSafe has, even if you have that racked properly to two different power supplies, two different UPSs, if both go out or if the rack goes out or whatever case, and there's a complete power failure, that last application write will still be preserved and actually written to the cluster written to the OneSafe cluster based upon our MVDM once that power comes back up. There's basically a replay log that'll compare that what's in that memory from the point at the initial power failure. Okay. Let's see. So there's a question about if they have an on-premises OneSafe and it's infected by the ransomware attack, what protections are put in place so the device is also not compromised? Yeah, if you're talking about like the OS, like basically the appliance that's running our software code, we have that protected in a variety of ways. So we use a TPM module in the appliance itself, so any necessary or sensitive information is stored there. If you're doing encryption at rest, nobody can get to the encryption passphrase. That's something that you control. StorageCraft support, we can't get to that if you lose that or if that's compromised. So ransomware can't compromise your encryption password for encryption at rest because it's never stored anywhere. And as far as like the BIOS and so forth, that's also protected via strong passwords. So there's really not a way that ransomware can compromise the device or the appliance or our software itself. It can really only get to the shares and to the data that's being presented to those applications. With Active Directory permissions and so forth, and for those precautions, if a share is compromised, then you can get that data back through the snapshots. Okay, so I'm going to shift now, and we talked about the unstructured data, right? Getting all that data off of VMware, having that consolidated, being able to manage that, and actually not do your typical backups, right? Because in that scenario, we were talking about having a OneSafe with the data replicated to another OneSafe, you're not actually doing a traditional backup anymore because there is no backup. The snapshots are your backup. They happen automatically. They're all deduped against the primary data. They're thinned out over time, and they fall off, if you will, based on the retention period. And now, instead of 100 terabyte deployment in the beginning, where you were backing up 100 terabytes, you're now only going to back up 25 terabytes, right? Because 75% of that capacity is unstructured. It's now sitting in OneSafe being protected. But for those VMs, how do you protect those and those other applications? This is where with either the OneSafe converge, depending upon the scope and the scale of your environment, or if this is a software only deployment of ShadowSafe in, say, a remote office, right? Couple VMs, you're going to have ShadowSafe protect things locally, maybe replicate those to the cloud. But the way that we do this is, again, something we have a number of patents around. So the object store, just the OneSafe architecture, we have a number of patents around. But virtual boot is also a patent that we have, and many of you on the call are familiar with Shadow Protect for years, and I see some of the old names here that have been using Shadow Protect for a long time. This is a very similar capability to be able to recover any sized VM in less than a second. And so if you're using OneSafe as a backup target, you can use all flash, or you can use our hard drive based models. You can also use third-party storage, right? If it's, say, a remote office or branch office. From there, we actually have the ability to use virtual boot and recover that VM. And the way that it actually works is actually something that I mentioned we have a number of patents around, but it makes it very transparent and easy to define different service level objectives, different recovery points for different VMs in your portfolio. But now you actually have the opportunity, as they grow, as you scale out and either adding more storage, you're not actually changing your backup schedules, right? So if you start today and you've got 20 terabytes and you have OneSafe, or let me use the 10 terabyte example that I have on the slide. If you're using OneSafe as a backup target and it starts at 10 terabytes and you want to grow this over time to 100 terabytes, that pool of storage just increases. You don't have to reconfigure your backups. You don't have to have different ways to authenticate or allocate storage to different shares. Now you can, if you want to do set share level quotas, you can do that. But when you're managing this environment through one system, this gives you the opportunity to actually not do a lot of manual things. Now I showed you the manual command line operation for promoting snapshots initially, but most of the things you're going to be able to do is very straightforward point and click, and it's very easy to set up policies. It's very easy to assign them to really, a few VMs or 30 VMs, right, or 100 VMs. You can do that through one system to manage not only the storage but also the data protection. Now, when you're using one system to recover and protect your VMs, you're able to see the status and the health of those over time. At the same time, when you're going to do a recovery, virtual boot, and I'll show you this live in a second here, this gives you the opportunity to recover any size VM in less than a second. It's different than a typical like instant recovery from other vendors, in that as soon as you want to recover that image from a different recovery point for that VM begins to boot immediately. Okay, and that's actually running off of the storage target. We'll just say you're using, when you're using OneSafe as a storage repository for your backups, that VM is actually booting off of OneSafe. And in less than a second, that VM is now booting up. And what happens is that VM thinks it's still accessing the primary storage that it was using before the failure, right? And so every time the application needs data, it's going to pull the data that it needs from OneSafe, from the backup target, and provide it directly to the VM. So the application is up and running, users are accessing that application. They don't know that it's actually in process of being recovered, because that recovery is dynamic, right? The data that it needs, it pulls back first, and then the data that it needs over time, it's more of a lazy restore. And any updates that the application is doing go directly to the primary storage. And then once that recovery process is complete, there's no more action. You don't have to do a vMotion afterwards. Excuse me, you don't have to do a storage vMotion afterwards. You don't have to stand up a VM before you do the recovery. This is all very quick and intuitive. And then when you're done, the VM just looks like it still has access to the primary storage, which it did before the failure. Okay, so this is one of the things that for both Hyper-V, here's a question that came in about VM platforms. We support this with VMware as well as Hyper-V. Okay, and there are agent and agentless based deployment options for those two hypervisors, and then for physical servers as well. You can actually install an agent on those servers and manage everything the same way, and do physical to virtual, virtual to physical recovery based upon your needs. There's a question about OneSafe, and that looks like an existing customer here asking about the OneSafe hardware that is Supermicro based, or are there other options? So it depends on the model. I won't call out who actually asked that question, but it depends on the model. So the one blocks 4312 is what we've had for and sold for years. We're no longer selling that as of early last year. That was built on a Supermicro hardware chassis, but it's all in appliance software. That same software that runs on the 4312 model runs on the 4412, 4417 models, and those are actually based upon the Dell systems. And so those are 12 or 17 bay systems, and they support up to 12 terabyte drives instead of up to 8 terabyte drives, which the Supermicro chassis did. And so, yeah, we have different new models. We actually support heterogeneous clusters as well. So over time, as you deploy these and you retire that hardware after 5 years, you simply add the new OneSafe hardware to that cluster. With the heterogeneous cluster, that pool of storage increases, but we can proactively evacuate the old hardware, and the new hardware is there. Users don't know that anything has changed. They're just accessing the storage on the new cluster. And this is actually one of the things that, again, coming back to a lot of existing OneSafe customers and OneBlocks customers that are using us. With this upgrade to 321, you can do this and make this transition from a 4312 model, which you may have been using for 5 years. In some cases, we already have customers that have been using it for 5 years. Add the new hardware to that cluster, evacuate the old 4312. You don't have to go through a change process. You don't have to change how your applications are accessing it. The virtual IP address, the UNC path, that all remains consistent. It's just now on new hardware. Okay, let's see, a couple other questions here. Are there latency problems during business or during updates? So if you're asking about the latency on the virtual boot, that's gonna be dependent upon the type of hardware that you're using. So if you have a OneSafe all flash, which we have customers doing today for those important VMs that need to be backup running as quickly as possible, as well as the backups take place as quickly as possible, you can use that, so that'll minimize the latency in that virtual boot recovery process. But ultimately, that recovered VM is going to go back to the primary storage, so that's one thing to consider: the performance of the primary as well as the secondary storage. So a couple of questions. Yeah, so there's a question about how affordable is this solution for SMB clients. Yeah, so if you're looking at OneSafe, over 3 years, it's less the cost of Amazon S3 storage. Actually working with customers right now, there are customers looking to go to Azure, but based upon the locations, based on the capacity, it's going to be about 4 times as expensive to have 80 terabytes or so stored in Azure versus having OneSafe clusters on premises with that performance, with the immutability of the protection that we talked about before. So, so that actually is something. The list price of just the hardware itself for a 4412 model is about $14,000, depending upon service level. And then you can actually bring your own drives if you want. The StorageCraft, we do also have that option to purchase drives from us as well. But so it's kind of a short answer on the a little bit. I shouldn't say short. I should say a broad answer on the how much is this affordable for SMB clients. From the data protection side, you can license ShadowSafe on a per VM basis, or per socket basis, or per physical server. And it's very price competitive in the market, and it's granular. You can protect 2 VMs or 1 VM and so forth. So we have priced OneSafe and ShadowSafe for mid-market customers, and so it's going to be you'll find it much more price attractive than some of the other tier 1 primary storage vendors. Okay, so let me jump over here, and I'm going to show you really quickly. We have a few questions still coming in, but I'm going to show you the virtual boot. So I'm going to log in here 1 second. Okay, so this is one system, and those that are longtime OneBlocks users, you'll notice this has a different look and feel. This is something that you'll be seeing later this year. We'll transition from the one system you have been using, which is focused on managing the storage, to one system that can now manage the storage, your OneSafe clusters here, as well as your data protection. And this will afford you the opportunity, based upon how you want to deploy OneSafe, how you want to use that over time. And you can, by the way, use any of these at any point in time. It's just a licensing enablement for incorporating data protection to the OneSafe you already have, as an example. Okay. So really quickly, this is one of the things that we focused on, is to make it very easy to understand what policies you have to protect different VMs, right? So here I have 23 machines which are protected with the policy of 15 minutes. So what's happening is it's taking snapshots of those VMs and backing those up every 15 minutes and keeping those for 2 days and keeping the daily recovery points for 3 days, etc. And you go down to different summary here, you can see different policies have different recovery points as well as retention of those. But we've also wanted to make it very easy to see, where those backups are going. Or if I want to change this, I can actually edit this policy here, and I can change this to 3. And now every machine that's being protected, I'm not going to change my policy actually, but all 23 machines that were protected with that policy are now uniformly updated based upon that new policy to 3-day retention. If I'm going to create a new policy, it's very easy to name that. Let's do May 14th. You can choose how frequently you want to take snapshots or back up those VMs and how long you want to keep them. And if you're going to replicate it to a different locations, you can very easily select that and you click save and you're done. So I'm actually not going to create a new policy here, but I wanted to show everybody how easy it was to create that policy. And if I'm going to protect different VMs, I can now apply that policy that I just created to, let's say R5U. I can just search that, and now I'll see all the different VMs that are here, and I can select which ones I want to protect. Well, let me take that, and I can assign any given policy I want to very easily. So whether I'm going to do that for a handful of VMs or an entire host with 50 or 60 VMs, you can do that. So I'm going to cancel out of this, and I'm going to go back to the recovery, because this is really what I wanted to show everybody in terms of virtual boot. So this is a recovery workflow. This is going to be where you'll see the recovery workflow for the snapshot promotion I talked about before, as you roll that into one system. But in the meantime, you have the opportunity to recover from a full system failure, or you can go in and recover individual files. Okay, so from here, I'm going to go into the system recovery, and if I want to, let's just find all the R5U servers. Okay, so these are all the VMs that I'm protecting, and let's say I'm going to go and recover this VM here. So now I'm going to see the different snapshots based upon my retention policy, different snapshot point in times, as well as where I'm going to recover that from. So if I'm doing something, if I'm backing it up locally and then replicating that off-site, I can recover off-site, and I can recover from the most optimal. In this case, I'm going to choose optimal, the closest location of this backup to the host that it resides on. So pick this recovery point, and now I have the option to choose where I want to recover it to. Am I going to recover it to vSphere or Hyper-V? Am I going to do a full VM restore instead of doing a virtual boot, which is boot the VM and begin to use it as it is, as opposed to I'm going to recover everything and then make the application available. So I'm going to just keep that, let's do it to, we'll do this to vSphere here. Then I can give it a name. We automatically tag it with recovery, so you can distinguish between the recovered VM versus the original. If you have multiple vCenters and multiple data centers, you select which one you want to recover it to, and then which host, right? And then from here, if you want to make the data store, you want that to access. That's the primary storage it was due before, was accessible, we'll keep that. And then number of CPUs, memory, etc. And if you want to have that network assigned to that VM right away, you can do that. And then you click next. Now, I'm not actually going to recover this, but those are just a few steps that you have to do to begin the virtual boot. And if you log into vCenter, you'll see that VM and that VM booting in literally less than a second. Okay, so now depending upon the backup target, right, you're going to be reading that data to boot the VM. So that's where you want to consider the cost and trade-off of all flash versus hard drive performance. Okay, so there's some other questions that came in here. We're running short on time here. But just a reminder, if you did have questions, put this in. I know I haven't been able to get to all the questions, but I do have them printed out afterwards, and we'll be able to circle back on that. All right, so here's a question about if a customer already has invested in other storage, can they use their existing storage with this? Yeah, so you can protect VMs with third-party storage. You can protect VMs with OneSafe as well. And so you don't have to use OneSafe as your backup target. They can leverage what they have, and you can have the same software capabilities I talked about here for virtual boot and apply that to any third-party storage, as well as OneSafe. So how many servers can be connected to OneSafe? So it's really about 2,000 SMB concurrent connections. And so when here somebody's asking about the servers, but if you're talking about end users accessing it, we support up to 2,000 SMB connections. So the number of servers is obviously going to be somewhere same number of connections. But if you're using it for VMware, you can have 30, 50 hosts. We're not going to be the 100,000 IOPS, more like 30, 40,000 IOPS kind of range. But that's obviously more performance than a lot of organizations need. But so the number of servers connecting to it, not that big of an issue. If the question was around servers being backed up to OneSafe, we actually manage the scheduling of those VMs dynamically based upon the host resources and schedule those so we don't completely overwhelm the host, and we'll just group those VMs accordingly. Yeah, so here's a question about, can you explain the CDP snapshot policy every 90 seconds, the first hour for the first day? Yeah, so what you wind up seeing, let me see if I can get here. Let me go back to this. So more recently here, with an active file system, we take a snapshot every 90 seconds. And so what you'll see here, actually, let me go back to this. I'm gonna jump to this slide here, okay? So for this, every 90 seconds, we take a snapshot of the file system. That snapshot is what you saw in my Mac Finder there for the different recovery points. Those recovery points are immutable. And with an active file system, you'll see snapshots every 90 seconds. Now, we'll continue to take snapshots every 90 seconds, but after the first hour, we kind of throw away, if you will, those snapshots that are more frequent than an hour. So between hour 1 and hour 24, you're going to have 24 recovery points, and you're going to have recovery points every 90 seconds for the first hour, and then daily for the first week, and weekly recovery points for the first year. Okay, so we are just continually taking snapshots, but you can think of it as we just thin them out or let the other ones fall off, and just keep a recovery point every hour for the first day and every week for the first year. Okay. Excuse me. Okay, let's go back. See if there are any other questions here. There's one other one I wanted to get to that I saw. So can you also do a restore to AWS or GCP? So, excuse me, we do have the option for having a policy that will replicate the data to S3 or GCP. You also have the opportunity to replicate to StorageCraft's cloud. So for virtual boot, it's best done, it's actually a way you can do it to third-party clouds. With StorageCraft, you have the opportunity to recover the whole system in the cloud and actually run those networking and data protection, the data services in our cloud back onto your premises. Virtual boot's a good way to actually do the planned fail back, right? Where you can fail from the cloud back on premises. That's actually something that works really well. Okay, so a couple of things I want to just highlight here. A couple customer success about how they've been using it. So Kawasaki Motors, they actually have over, well, almost 2 petabytes now deployed in a number of clusters for different purposes, right? So they actually have over a petabyte of primary storage for all their unstructured data. This is for all the home directories, but it's also for all their engineering CAD/CAM files, right? And clearly, being a manufacturing company, that's an important part to what they do as a business. And so they actually replicate that to 2 different clusters in 2 different data centers that they have, as well as they have another cluster set up, another 7-node cluster set up for a Veeam backup repository. And what Paul was looking for, I've been working with Paul since 2015 when he first bought his first OneBlocks. And as his needs has changed and as his uses have changed in terms of business requirements, capacities have grown, he's continued to scale out those clusters and be able to recover from any restore requests he has, right? But he really needed to have that protection from deletions, and over time, ransomware has become much more prominent as far as a model to protect against. But this is one of the things that he's been doing for a long time. And is actually now taking advantage of this upgrade that I was talking about earlier about the newer models with the higher density. so you can actually decrease the number of nodes you need in the cluster and still have the capacity. Other agencies, I know a number of people here on the call are from government as well as private sector and so forth. This is actually a prosecutor's office out of New Jersey. They've again been a long-time customer. They have a couple hundred terabytes deployed. They use it for the evidentiary data repository, right? So the snapshots are protecting that. They also use it for body-worn cameras as well as dash cam. And so whether you're looking at video, whether you're looking at just typical files that are deduped and compressed, that's all information that you can just keep adding and growing over time. So it makes it very easy to use because they need to have that confidence that the original data they wrote as part of the evidentiary data repository is actually what is actually read back months or years later, right? And that's also what one of the largest law enforcement agencies here in California use. They have a larger deployment, but a very similar approach. And this is something that with an object storage, you're always guaranteed to get back that original data. We're not susceptible to bit rot or Uber because you have a hash value. It's not a RAID or parity calculation where you can get a bit flip, right? It's actually one of the things that it allows them to have that chain of custody and that data integrity confidence based upon the primary data being written is what will be read from, as well as it being protected via snapshots. So good. So last couple questions, and we are going to choose the winners. So a couple things on the winners here. We'll email the winner for the Grubhub, and then we'll also email the 2 winners for the best questions. Okay. When you get the email for the best questions, just let us know which type of gift certificate you'd like, and we'll get that out to you. And so a couple of questions about recordings. Yeah, this is actually going to be replicated. This is actually going to be recorded, and we'll have that available for everybody as well. So I'd like to thank everybody. I know we're at the top of the hour, and there's a lot of information to kind of get in to a short 60 minutes, but it's one of the things I really want to focus on in terms of not so much about the marketing side of things, but just technically how is StorageCraft helping you to recover your data in different types of scenarios, and how can you actually think about things a little bit differently to provide better levels of potentially recovery points and data protection services that are a little bit atypical than some people have thought. So thank you everybody for attending, and we'll be following up with the email to the winners, as well as following up with the email afterwards. We do have a number of obviously promotions and so forth for data protection and storage that we can certainly share with you at that time. But I'd like to thank everybody for attending today, and have a great day and stay safe and healthy.